Thanks so much for joining us for another special edition of Take Two. We are inching up closer and closer to the election, less than 2 weeks away. Joining me today is Congressman Blake Moore in the 1st Congressional District. Thanks so much for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
There's been a break where there haven't been a lot of votes going on. You've been back home in the district. Where are you spending your time?
Well, like yesterday I was with several chambers of commerce, and today I met with my debt and deficit task force. There's a big summit about aerospace engineering that's going on the second half of the week. So it's constantly just a different type of schedule, but a lot of really good things going on and back home. And
what's been the most exciting thing that you've dropped in on and saw that was going on in Utah that you haven't really learned a lot about until now?
Other than Little League playoffs?
Aside from Little League playoffs, which are very awesome right now.
You know, I would actually say that, Hill Air Force Base is a big part of the 1st District. And surrounding Hill Air Force Base has a lot of different unique advanced manufacturing. You also have a lot of that going on up in Promontory, up in the northern part of the state. We have a unique summit coming. It's called 47G. With a lot of different stakeholders. I get to interview, or I guess run a panel with General Bell, who's at Hill Air Force Base. So some of that defense work is pretty unique and special to the 1st District, so I think I would go with that.
Yeah, we have a lot of people who work there on the base and at least supporting it as well. While we're talking to people as we go into the election, it seems like the economy and the border are the top issues, and I think when it comes down to it, the economy is the biggest thing for people. What can you do when you return to Congress to maybe work in the right direction that we haven't already to get families feeling like they have a little wiggle room left in their budget?
Absolutely. The most important thing has always been the economy. Every time we poll and talk to our constituents, that's the number one thing. There's a lot of other issues that exist, like you mentioned, the border and the like. But next year, the majority of the tax provisions from the 2017 tax bill all expire. And there'll be a massive tax increase on all Americans if we don't get something done in this next calendar year in 2005, because they all expire at the end of 2025. Section 199A, a little bit wonky, but that is something that directly affects small businesses. I spent about an hour with the Ogden Chamber of Commerce yesterday explaining to them, how this could play out, what goes, if the deduction goes away, what that means to small business, but how we can reassure that we do it. Those are the things that they're not the most popular to talk about, particularly on the campaign trail, but they are some of the most important things that directly impact job and wage growth. And that's what we're focused on.
So when will that come into play? Because the budgeting process is not very streamlined in Congress. People always talk about making it work well. The House has passed several bills that the Senate didn't, trying to get to the right place, but you voted for that continuing resolution. We get to another deadline, December 20th, so the question is, does it get kicked into the new year? Is budget actually going into place? But the problem is it starts to feel like political theater every time this happens, and we're not getting things done on time. How does that change, and what are you doing to make a change in that regard?
And the worst part about this is that the entire budgeting process you're just talking about is less than 25% of our entire budget. 75% of the budget goes unchecked and goes completely, you don't even get a chance to vote on it.
And we're talking about Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid?
Continuing on with TANF, veterans programs, all these things that are very important, but the fact that we never vote on them is actually a detriment to our ability to keep them reformed and keep them in the right process, keep them updated. We don't need the same type of program that existed in the 1960s. We need a program that fits today's current situation. So I've introduced a bill that's called the Comprehensive Congressional Budget Act, and it would require all of Congress to vote every year on every dollar that actually gets appropriated, spent, put out in these programs. Doesn't mean you'd cut the programs. It just means you get an opportunity to reform them along the way. It's a long shot to get it done anytime in the next year, but that's a key thing. With regards to the appropriation process, like you mentioned.
What kind of support do you have on that one before we move on?
So we've been able to introduce it through committee. There is bipartisan support, actually, and we think this is more of a 119th opportunity. But Americans for Prosperity actually presented the idea to us originally. That's a group that is heavily involved in Utah, and they have one thing in mind, is making sure that we have a strong economic fiscal future ahead of us. And so I was thrilled that they chose our office to sort of introduce it to us, and we ran with it. And so it's a good bill. But with regards to the budgeting process that you talked about, these are things that keep our military going, that keep our military paid, and the programs that we have in place. Our veterans, these are types of things that we need to be able to get done on time. The Senate didn't do a single bill. The House did the vast majority of the spending. The Senate didn't do a single thing. So we would love it for the senators to actually get their job done sometimes. I'm not trying to pass the buck, but that's why we come up against these deadlines, is because they haven't produced any type of tangible bill that anybody can actually finalize, and hopefully we do that by December.
Is this partially a leadership problem where the Senate and the House are not getting along and working together, or what's the holdup?
It's not uncommon that the Senate and the House don't get along together, and then leadership. And now that it's, Democrat-controlled Senate, Republican-controlled House, there's a lot of tension. So yes, that's all part of it, and we need to be able to just kind of get above that and actually get the darn thing done.
What do you expect to happen December 20th? Because as you mentioned, we have a lot of families on Hill Air Force Base, or those who work doing taxes in the Ogden area. And I don't think leading up to the holidays, they're probably hoping for a government shutdown.
Yeah, that wouldn't be ideal for anybody involved, and then it becomes a blame game. And again, we would hear a lot of what I just talked about: this House blaming the Senate blaming the Speaker, and all that type of stuff. So hopefully we can, we agreed to certain funding levels through last year's Fiscal Responsibility Act. We have kept that number. We have reduced spending. We have done the responsible thing, and it hasn't always been easy. We should be able to finalize this and hopefully avoid going into a shutdown over Christmas, so politicians can kind of beat their chest and act like they're doing something. Again, 75% of the budget goes untouched through this entire process, and that's where our debt is driving.
Do you foresee a conversation in that other part of the budget, whether it be Social Security or whatnot, coming in the first part of the year? Because we are in that point where we know 10 years from now that the program won't be solvent, which means that checks will be cut. It won't completely go away, but a drastic change for families who are counting on those checks.
I love how you're presenting that. It's so informed, and I love that you're able to communicate to your viewers, like, that's the reality here. We have less than a decade to make it so that those programs don't become completely insolvent. We did the Fiscal Commission Act. We passed that out of the Budget Committee this year, and it faced some stiff competition because different groups were kind of going after, groups from the left and groups from the right were going after something that actually needed to get done. So it was unified support from Republicans. We had a handful of Democrats being supportive of it, and we need to see this thing through. And what this will do is it will create an opportunity to gather all their key stakeholders, members of Congress, groups like Committee for Responsible Federal Budgeting, Cato Institute, these types of individuals, to come up with the best solutions that we can put forward, cement it, put it on the House floor, on the Senate floor, and then we would be able to get it into law. That type of catalyst hasn't existed in these types of things before, and we had a lot of momentum just about 9 months ago on this, and it's fizzled a little bit, but I think we can kind of re-engage it for the next Congress.
Well, we're talking about the economy. I think drug prices are a big issue and a big part of budgets, especially for some of our elderly members of the community. I saw that you were talking to a cancer center today about those drug prices. What can be done with Congress? Well, we're looking at the free market and not telling people what prices they can be, but also trying to figure out a way that companies aren't charging exorbitant fees for something that doesn't have to be that expensive.
There's a ton of churn that goes on in the process when it goes from being research and development, creation of the medicine to the consumer. And in that process, there is an enormous amount of churn, some would call it glut, that exists that costs a ton of money. And so we passed what's called the lower costs, more transparency. It's a healthcare related bill. 3 different committees have jurisdiction over this. Ways and Means, the committee that I'm on, is a key part of it. We passed that with broad bipartisan support that will incorporate measures to make sure that all of these entities that get involved in this process are having to report their data, their costs associated with it, should be able to create a little bit more competition and hopefully naturally lower the price. So it's a really good piece of legislation, broadly supported. We keep working on things like that, but that's the key, is if we've got this, you often hear value over volume, and if we in our healthcare market, we are hyper-focused, unfortunately, on volume instead of the value-based care and incentivizing so people don't get sick, people staying out of the hospital. and we just get involved in a lot of the middleman schemes that go on. And we're trying to target that as much as possible.
Very good. I want to talk a little bit about the debt that we're seeing right now. We keep seeing the big number of $35 trillion, and obviously the budgeting process is important. A lot of people are talking about we can't keep printing money. What is the right way forward, and as quickly as possible, to turn things around? Because I know the concern's been inflation, and people were hoping things would turn around, but even as we're seeing Fed cut rate, mortgage rates are still going up, and I don't know that everything economically is going in the direction that people are wanting right now when they're buying gas or buying their groceries.
Well, 75% of any poll I've seen in the last 2 years, clear countries going in the wrong direction. Like that's been very consistent data. This debt problem and crisis has been first and foremost to, I know, the first district residents, but all of Utah, because we're such a fiscally responsible state. And there's a huge frustration in how this plays out. I mentioned earlier that I had just come from my debt and deficit task force. It's a group of Weber County, Davis County individuals that have engaged with me on coming up with solutions. We have a whole list of recommendations, and we're going to come up with new recommendations as we determine what happens politically in the next few weeks. Because then it depends on if Republicans have the White House, House, and Senate, they have a real opportunity to do what I don't think they did enough of in 2017, is that's find mandatory spending reform and areas to cut some of our bloated spending. The number one thing on everybody's mind is improper payments. There's approximately $200 billion a year that you could save just by mistakes and improper payments that are made on all this. And this should be an easy bipartisan win. But we've been unable to sort of knock it out as we came out of COVID. A lot of it happened during COVID too. So the biggest issue where our debt is growing so fast right now is because it's not because of the defense budget, it's not because of a veterans program here or there, or a Homeland Security budget. It is because the interest that we pay on the debt was about $240 billion maybe 7 years ago. It's at $950 billion now. So we're in this early stage of this debt spiral, but if we can get interest rates to tick back down, we should be able to take a little bit of a dip in that, and then making sure that we figure out how to deal with our major spending. And that's the mandatory budget, like I said, that we don't deal with. And the bill that I've proposed would force Congress to vote on everything instead of just a small portion of the budget.
President Trump has said that if he wins, that he would get a few people in his cabinet that would start going through and making cuts to many federal agencies, whether it was 10%, 15%, but cutting. Would you support something like that?
Absolutely. Like, our federal government has grown wildly out of control, and particularly the executive branch. And so I would love to see an executive come in and be willing to limit their own power. Now, with this Chevron deference case, which I'm sure, those that are aware of it are super excited about the potential here. But 40 years ago, there was a court ruling that gave the administration, so the executive branch, more power in rulemaking and regulatory reform. It basically said, well, if Congress hasn't perfectly, identified what the regulations should look like, we have more power in the executive branch to do so. That has now been overturned. And so more of this power of regulatory the regulatory environment can go through Congress more now, and it always should, but it now has this new court environment, the legal environment that'll make it a little bit easier. That's another big thing that can happen over the course of the next few years, and I'm hopeful that we're able to find waste and fraud in our budget and continue to do so. Everything has to be on the table, and just looking at our federal agencies and finding out where we can make reductions, or it's just maybe there's an area that you just freeze hiring and say, look, we've got enough workforce in this particular agency. We're not going to totally eliminate it, but we're going to freeze some hiring. I think you saw President Trump do a little bit of that in his first term. This is something that we have to consider and going forward. But again, it will still be a small portion of our overall budget and our overall deficit. Just cutting an agency 20% is probably a very good thing, but it still won't dip into our debt because we have these huge programs that we never vote on.
Debt trickles into the immigration and the border crisis. If you ask the Harris and Biden administration, amnesty seems like the way forward they want at this point. And if you ask President Trump, he wants a massive deportation effort, which would cost billions of dollars. What do you see as the way forward to fix some of these problems? Immigration and the border are two separate issues, but intertwined.
Correct.
So what can Congress do? The Biden administration saying that Congress had a chance and they let it go.
Right, so you've properly identified what a lot of people misconstrue. Immigration reform needs to happen. We need a stronger workforce here, no question. Everybody believes that. But we have a major border issue where the cartels are pretty much controlling our southern border. And so to deal with that piece, first and foremost, you have to have three major things happen. You need to reinstall Remain in Mexico. That policy was a very humane, sensible way for the U.S. and the Mexican governments to work together to make sure that people that are requesting asylum are doing it for the right reasons and not just to take advantage of loopholes in the system. So dealing with the catch and release program as well, that has to end. And Secretary Mayorkas has let that go on for far too long. Ultimately, it's Biden's fault. But and then dealing with the nuance to parole those three things were absent of any deal that was made in the Senate.
And do you think
if
that
we don't
that
have
needs to be
those
done
three
by
things,
executive order, or does Congress need to make sure that happens?
It needs to be done. And we voted on a bill, it's called H.R. 2, that took care of all of that stuff. Senator Schumer never once even considered it. And there are plenty of Democrats that agree that those things actually should be taken in. They may not have liked our entire H.R. 2, but there are plenty of Democrats that believe that some of those key border provisions need to actually happen. But Chuck Schumer wouldn't touch it. And I hope the American people understand the fact that we had a border bill, Senator Schumer wouldn't touch it. They created a compromise during the Ukraine debates and all that kind of stuff. It may have improved things. It would have done really nothing substantive and didn't have any of those three pieces that us in the House really wanted to be able to see. And it didn't have anything like that in it. So it is a little bit of gamesmanship, political gamesmanship for the Biden-Harris administration to say they had this border bill that would have fixed everything. It's not true. It wouldn't have been able to address our major issues. And I didn't even mention a physical border, the wall. If you just change the policy, you could limit border activity by a significant percentage. The wall will definitely help in some ways, and there's a lot of trafficking that goes on. I mean, there's areas that helps, but I'm talking just the change in policy. So if it has to happen via executive order, then it might have to happen via executive order if we can't get Democrats in the Senate to actually agree to this.
We're out of time, unfortunately, but before I let you go, I wanted to ask you really quickly about the spending right now that's going to Ukraine and Israel, obviously vastly different issues. Where do you stand on that continuing spending, because there are going to be more requests for Ukraine? Do we keep sending money? Are there checks and balances to make sure it's going the right way, or what do you want to see happen?
This cannot become an endless conflict. Everybody knows that. President Zelensky knows that. We have to come up with and forge ahead what a resolution to this looks like. And that does not require an enormous amount of money. The money that is out there that should be leveraged more is the Russian seized assets that exist. And we did that in the last bill. We actually took Russian seized assets to help rebuild with some of the havoc that they've wreaked on Ukraine. That is a significant deterrence that needs to be incorporated more. But we've got to forge ahead. We've got to think like, what happened in South Korea? We created an armistice, we ended the conflict, and we created a safe and secure South Korea for them to be able to flourish. You can look at Germany back in World War II. It may not be what Putin loves, it may not be what Zelensky loves, but we've got to find a resolution to this, because it can't just be, bleeding out more money and more soldiers that's taking place. We've got to find an end to this. And I think that there's an opportunity to do that in the coming months. And
does Congress need to keep supporting Israel and what they're doing in their defense?
Yes, and you're seeing some real success. Hezbollah and Hamas have rained terror on that whole region, but it all comes from Iran. All we need to make sure we do, and I don't think that the Biden administration, I know that he has done a poor job with regards to getting back into the Iran nuclear deal and trying to negotiate those talks, because it just destabilizes the region. You have to take a strong stance against Iran, and then the other Arab states will galvanize and continue to create a better relationship with Israel. We saw that happening with the Abraham Accords. So supporting Abraham Accords is key. Opposing Iran and their proxies is key, and we can potentially have more opportunities for peace there.
Unfortunately, we don't have time to tackle all the issues. If people want to look at some of the other specific issues that matter to them when they're voting, where do they go and how do they get more information?
So regarding our campaign, they can go to Elect More. It's a play on words. I admit I have a decent last name for elections, so Elect More, Moore, and we've got plenty of stuff there, and just don't hesitate to reach out.
All right, very good.
Thank you.
And the election day, again, is just inching up on us. October 25th is the last day to register, although here in Utah, you can go on election day and make sure you get that ballot and vote. So plenty of time to do that. Thanks so much for coming in today.
Thank you so much.